Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the Keighley Poltergeist podcast with me, Stephen Miller. If you've not listened to episode 1, I'd highly recommend doing so that you're up to speed with the story so far. Before I start, I just want to say thanks to Andy from Keighley Paranormal Investigations for sharing the podcast and David for offering a guest writer spot in the UK and Ireland's leading horror and paranormal magazine, Spooky Isles. So if you're here via either of those, then welcome. A quick recap. A 19-year-old mill worker in Keighley was seemingly the cause of machinery breaking and objects moving at home and at work. After less than helpful support from experts and medical professionals, her manager got in touch with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and she was whisked off to London for further study at the British College of Psychic Science. So in this episode, I'm going to share details from the report written of her time at the college by its founder and principal, James Hewat McKenzie. And this will include details of the incidents that happened there and how they tried to help her. I've also got 2 research breakthroughs to share. Firstly, I've identified the mills she worked where the activity started, and something else which I will save for the end. I said in the first episode that this will be a podcast documenting my research, warts and all. And there are bound to be some missteps along the way, as new evidence comes to light and things change. In the first episode, I said that Hewat McKenzie had spent 11 days in Keighley before taking the woman back to London, but that was incorrect. He was only there for 2 days. He arrived on the 6th of May 1925, and by the 8th of May, they were both back at the college, so apologies. Now, my mill research breakthrough. The mill had always been anonymised in newspaper reports, and in Hewat McKenzie's report, he refers to the mill as P mill, as his attempt to anonymise it. Now, there were a few potentials at the time in Keighley. There was a Pondon Mill, Prospect Mill, and Peel Mill. But a newspaper article mentioned that the mill was in the Ingro area of Keighley, a specific location to the west of the town. With these 2 pieces of information, I was able to cross-reference, and I can now confidently say that the mill the woman was working at was Prospect Mill. Unfortunately, the majority of the mill buildings were demolished following a large fire in 2016, but a small office still survives on South Street. It's now a Grade 2 listed building. It's currently used by a mobility company, which I can't decide whether that's ironic or not. It's also pretty close, about half a mile, to the Heber Street Spiritualist Church, which has been in the same building since 1895. I'm going to contact them and see whether they've got any records from the 1920s which might be of interest or use. I'm not really sure whether the spiritualist Keighley angle is important or not, but it's definitely worth still investigating at this stage. Now, the report also includes the original letter from Mr. Bell, the manager at Prospect Mill. He mentioned that she'd worked at another mill before starting with him, and this one is written as R-C mills, which I'm now confident, given the location that we know, would have been Robert Clough's Grove Mill, which is also in the Ingro area of Keighley. That mill was demolished in 2010 for a housing development. Now, Mr. Bell says that she had had similar problems there in the August of 1924, but only for a few days, with machinery malfunctioning, threads snapping. During her stay at the college, she spoke to Hewat McKenzie's wife about having a nervous breakdown in that summer, the summer of 1924, following a failed love affair, and that she'd spent some time in hospital. And it was actually during her stay there that the strange phenomena of items moving first started. It was witnessed by nurses in the hospital and reported to the matron. So through that letter, we're adding to the timeline of activity, as well as to the locations and the witnesses who saw things. Hewat McKenzie's report, The Haunted Mill Girl, was published in October 1925 in the Quarterly Transactions of the British College of Psychic Science, effectively making it publicly available. Newspapers in the UK and abroad all managed to get hold of the report and reported on it. During the report, he uses a pseudonym, Gwyn, or sometimes just G, to refer to the woman, which I'm not going to use as I know that wasn't her name, although others have assumed so online in other places. Here's Hewat McKenzie's description of the woman. Stoutly built, dark, and lethargic in temperament, she has good physical strength and seemed happy in her work. Occasional fits of depression obsessed her in the early weeks of her visit, and the other maids were encouraged to rally her out of these, as the greatest violence was observable during such times. A curious look in her eyes, which all in the house learned to recognize, accompanied these attacks. G is of average intelligence for a working girl. Her father and mother were apparently of better education than herself, but on the whole, she was uncommunicative regarding her own affairs, even when she'd made friends with anyone. The woman was given a role on the house staff at the college while she was there to be observed and studied as a maid. The other maids at the college were pretty experienced, as they had welcomed other people in for study and observation. But it turned out they'd never had anyone quite like this before. The activity during her stay caused hundreds of pounds worth of damage to property. In today's money, that would be thousands of pounds. The kitchen was described as looking as if there'd been an earthquake, and her bedroom as if a tornado had swept over it. Whilst previous visitors, some had been able to move small, light objects without touching them, there was a real violence and scale to the activity associated with the woman in our story. The size and weight of an object didn't seem to really matter, and this marked her out as unique. Incidents at the college were witnessed by multiple people, from the other maids to visitors, college staff, and Hewat McKenzie himself and his family. His wife Barbara had the task of collating all the activity into a daily diary. In all the entries, it's always noted where the woman was in relation to the moving item, and this is often a good distance. So it definitely wasn't just a case of her throwing things when people weren't looking. There is also, it seems, a focus on certain objects, which Hewat McKenzie writes the poltergeist liked to handle. Here's a view on the case from him. Readers here have a continuous record made from day to day, and one made by people competent to judge such cases, neither afraid of the forces operating nor making light of the seriousness of the matter for the girl who was involved. There is nothing exaggerated. The wish of all the observers was to report correctly and to secure relief for the victim as speedily as possible. Probably no other house in these islands would or could have dealt with such a case in the same way, for the damage to furniture has been extraordinarily heavy, a charge a private house could ill stand. Residents in houses visited by a poltergeist usually get thoroughly frightened and nerve-stricken, and soon rid themselves of the ostensible cause of it. So heavy at times were the disturbances, that looking on dispassionately, one wondered how the girl at the centre of it all stood it, and whether, if no relief came, a desperate remedy might not have suggested itself to her. So, incidents at the college. There is a long, long list of them. I've kind of summarised them here into different headings of mainly the types of objects that were moving. A big one was tables. Tables would regularly move, rising and falling, sliding, flipping over. On one occasion, the table moved 3 feet sideways, pushing the woman along with it. This is how one case is documented in the report. Table movements as usual during the staff meal and a good deal of hilarity. The maids are half interested, half afraid, but the housekeeper keeps very collected, and it's only really annoyed when things are broken. The table usually tilts towards G, which is an interesting detail. Chairs is another target for activity, either violently flipping over or on occasion really gently falling to the floor. There was a sofa that would be flipped over, very heavy sofa leading to its feet pointing up at the ceiling. There was an office desk that seemed to be a favourite. The drawers would be found on the floor emptied. The desk itself would move from the wall despite it being very, very heavy. On one occasion, a small wicker table was observed rising to the height of the ceiling before lowering itself gently to the ground, with the woman stood feet away. Another occasion, a bundle of clean towels, which was on the side waiting to be folded, were lifted and spread out in an amusing way on the floor. It doesn't say what the amusing way the towels were spread out was. When G was shown to her bedroom, the bed collapsed. Items from the washstand fell to the floor and smashed, and the woman and another maid left the room in fear. The maid kindly proposed that she slept in her room rather than on her own that night. It was very rare that anyone got hurt in any of the incidents, but there was one where a heavy brush flew across a room and hit the woman herself in the chest. Here's another extract from the report. The staff breakfast table was very lively. Several cups and saucers fell off the table and broke, and chairs seemed to slide about. G had to be asked to go into the garden. again to give the maids a rest from the constant clearing up of breakages and movement of articles. Not that G was not perfectly willing to do this herself, but when this force was in play, her continued presence only made things worse. Readers will realise that English servants today do not take such additional labours lightly, and they were on high alert to see that G was not causing any of the trouble directly. During the whole time of her stay, I did not hear one suggestion of this sort from any of the other maids, who had all been in my employment for a considerable time. The woman would often be sent to the garden when things got really bad in the house. She also had several trips out of London, into the countryside for the day, and it was on these trips that a new phenomenon started. The phenomenon of objects disappearing, either for good or sometimes reappearing. Items such as sewing equipment, a knife, some garden shears, some bananas. She would be holding them 1 second and then they were gone, often found later in a place that had already been searched. Some observations from Hewat McKenzie on the phenomenon. Firstly, one for the skeptics, I think. It is strange to note that the direct gaze of the eye of a spectator can put a stop to all phenomena. On many occasions I tested this, finding every time that it was only when I pretended indifference or turned slightly away that an object would move. Very little was ever seen in transit when objects were moved in space. This is also a known peculiarity of such phenomena, as if for an instant objects are rendered invisible. So things only moved around when no one was really looking. But then, on how the objects themselves actually moved. The movement is different from that of an object falling through the force of gravity or thrown by a human hand. The articles sometimes rose against gravity and then would fall with a force far in excess of a normal drop. I tried to find if G felt anything while the heavy articles were thrown about. Only once during a particularly bad disturbance did she say that she felt a peculiar drawing in the limbs. On this sole occasion, before the question had been put to G, Mrs. Mackenzie going into the kitchen during the disturbance and stood where G had been for a moment. She became aware that she stood in the centre of a force of some sort. A kind of electrical discharge was affecting her limbs. So, apart from sending her into the garden and trips to the countryside, both seem very sensible, how did the college try and help her? Well, Hewat McKenzie includes a section in the report titled, How Can Poltergeist Cases Be Helped? Perfect. So, there's some solid life advice in there. Physical exercise, good habits around food and general health, and then maybe some not so great advice. On one occasion, it just says to avoid all passion and evil moods. Seems very British. Just pretend everything is fine. But their main approach to find a way of communicating with the entity was who they believed causing the issues. To do this, they used clairvoyance and mediumship at weekly seances. Hewat McKenzie was himself experienced in such matters, but he also brought in a trance medium named Kathleen Barkle to assist. During the seances, very little physical activity happened. Occasionally, the table would move or sway slightly, but before and after the seances, things could be very chaotic and destructive. Barkle would put the woman in a trance and then speak with her about her past, her family, problems that she'd had, and she also spoke with her dead relatives and passed on messages. Here's Hewat McKenzie again. One relative, whose life had been misspent and who had been a very heavy drinker, was clearly seen. G feared and hated this personality in life and beyond death, and had herself often seen him clairvoyantly before the disturbances began at all. Through Mrs. Barkle's guide, I got in touch with him, and he promised to carry out any instructions I might give for the benefit of the girl. The request was made that I should withdraw altogether from any contact with her, and not return except by request. Mrs. Barkle's guide. For me, this is where things got even more strange and, to be honest, a little bit problematic. Mediums and people involved in the psychic sciences often professed to have spirit guides who could support them and the people they were helping in the unseen, the spirit world, the other side. Barkle's was an 800-year-old Native American Sioux chief called Whitehawk. Hewat McKenzie's was called Professor J. Both spirit guides were called upon during the seances to act on their behalf in the unseen, to help the woman and speak with the poltergeist itself. It was Whitehawk who spoke with the poltergeist, and he promised to leave the woman alone. Hewat McKenzie made a broader appeal in the unseen, and this is a direct quote using his language. In my own room, and unknown to anyone, I made the request that a band of Indians who sometimes profess to help should take G in hand and protect her from the assaults of disturbing intelligences. But whether it was the fresh air, exercise, good diet, or the help of Whitehawk and Professor J, it worked. In the final 5 weeks of the woman's 3-month stay, very little activity occurred, and on the 8th of August 1925, she left for home, saying that she missed her mother. Hewat McKenzie. I hope the cure will remain effective. The girl must earn her daily bread if she is to live, and these psychic disturbances were making it impossible for her to do so. Medical men could not assist her, and if the college, with its close study of these matters, failed also, she was indeed in a sorry plight. She was given the option of returning should the attacks recommence, or should work be difficult to find as the woolen strike was then on, and we did not wish depression to visit her again through lack of employment. Letters received from her since this date indicate that she is well and free from any annoyance. She has resumed her daily work in the mill. There is still a College of Psychic Studies in London, on Queensbury Place in South Kensington, but it's not got a direct lineage to Hewat McKenzie's college. Its origins lie in the London Spiritual Alliance. The building where all these incidents occurred was 59 Holland Park in North Kensington, next door to the Ukrainian embassy today. I've been in touch with the current college in case they might have anything of use. They were very helpful passing on my inquiry to their archivist, so I await to hear more. When the report was published, the press had a field day with it. Sensational headlines, haunted mill girl cured, and poltergeist dismissed. But they didn't really add anything to the story, just rehashing the more dramatic parts of the report. We do get a quote from a member of the woman's family. In October, a reporter from the Leeds Mercury visited her home, but she was at work, and a pretty eloquent family member said, "She is undoubtedly cured now of whatever was wrong with her. She is bright and happy, and is so much better, she can now laugh and joke at her former troubles. If an object should happen to fall in the room, she will laugh and say, 'Well, not me.' We prefer to think her trouble was due to some electrical phenomenon or magnetic influence rather than a psychic disturbance." What do I make of these events? Well, however it was presented in the press, in the report they are meticulously and unsensationally documented events and occurrences. Whilst it's hard to know what I do think, what I don't believe is that she was faking it, or that Hewat McKenzie was being dishonest in his work. Whether the other maids or members of staff could have been doing this to perhaps please their employer, it's possible. But how they managed some of the phenomena witnessed is very difficult to explain. Historical research is all about sources of information. This story can be told in hundreds of different ways, but the facts all come from the same few sources. The main ones being the newspaper articles and Hewat McKenzie's report. Everything I've said has been based upon these, and everything else that's available online about this case, as they use the same few sources, sometimes not very well. But for the next episode, I have found a new, untapped source, a book written by someone who worked for Hewat McKenzie at the college from 1916 until Hewat McKenzie's death in 1929, so it covers all the period that I'm interested in. The index includes an entry for Miss G, brackets, Yorkshire Mill Girl, and the author actually went with Hewat McKenzie to Keighley to pick her up in 1925. So if that's not enough to keep you listening, I have got 2 other revelations to share. 1, I know the haunted mill girl's name. And 2, a few months after returning home, the poltergeist is back. I've got some research to do, but I'll share more next time on the Keighley Poltergeist. A huge thanks for listening. Like, share, subscribe, get in touch at thekeighleypoltergeist@gmail.com. I'd love to know your thoughts, theories, and any questions you might have. But goodbye for now.